Next, we're going to talk about VCO3. You can tell just by looking at it that VCO3 is not like VCO1 and VCO2. VCO1 and VCO2 are the Arturia, the traditional Arturia oscillator. VCO3 is more utility oscillator, as you'll see, and doesn't have quite the same functionality, but that's cool. Let's take a look. Okay, first of all, we have only coarse tuning. So here's my advice to you. Since you don't have fine tuning on VCO3, these are analog oscillators, and thankfully they do have some drift to them, which is what we want in an analog oscillator. So that is cool. But in the case of fine tuning this oscillator, you can't do it from this oscillator section. There is a fine tune knob over here on the synthesizer that you can use to fine tune the synthesizer. So I'm going to suggest that when you tune the MatrixBrute, you start with oscillator 3 so that you can use the global fine tune to get it right in tune, and then tune the other oscillators which have fine tune to it. I think that'll save you a lot of effort, and it'll be easier to tune to, because if you tuned it to one of these oscillators, you can't fine tune oscillator 3 to these oscillators. Okay, so this coarse tune works the same way as on the other oscillators, where you can see where the octave is when the light goes on. The light goes on. And you'll notice it is quantized to the specific notes of the scale. I mean, half steps. But again, you can use that great light to find the octaves, which is often what you're doing. You're looking for octaves when you're turning the tuning knob, so that is cool. So you have a wide range using the coarse tuning control. It's the same as the other oscillators. Next, we have the wave control, where you get to select what waveform it is. Now, granted, you don't have the ability to mix and match, nor do you have the special wave shaping functionality that you do in the other oscillators, but that's fine. This is more like a typical oscillator. It does go, the selector goes from left or right to left instead of left to right, which is interesting. I'm not sure why, but anyway. We also have a sine wave here. Triangle. And a 50% duty cycle square wave. Great sounding. Next, we look at this thing that says LFO div. Now, I'm going to blow your mind right now. You probably already know. Anyway, the MatrixBrute has not one, not two, but actually 3 LFOs, because you can use oscillator 3 as an LFO, much like a traditional synthesizer of the past, which is awesome. That gives you an awful lot of oscillating modulation sources, and that's great. LFO div comes into play when you're using oscillator 3 as an LFO. So we'll talk about that functionality when we're talking about the LFOs. But there is one more thing I want to talk to you about in regard to this section, and that is keyboard track. Now, what this means, when this is on, it means that oscillator 3 is responding to the voltage coming from the keyboard, which is what's generating the notes we hear. That's cool. So when we turn it off, we get this. Ooh, and I think, let's see. I'm going to turn it back on and play a different note. So you can define what frequency it is set at when keyboard track is off by the last note you play. So I'm just going to play a D because I like D. Anyway, so now you might say, okay, Mark, now it's only playing one frequency. What good is that? Well, it has a lot of good when it's acting as an LFO and you don't want the keys to speed up or slow down the frequency of this oscillator acting as an LFO. So that's cool. Again, that's the thing we'll talk about more when we're dealing with the LFOs. But right now, I want to talk about it because it's had a different effect that you may not have seen or really couldn't have seen. But I'm going to show you right now. When you have keyboard track off, the coarse control stops being quantized to specific scale frequencies, and it becomes a full-on, full-range frequency control, much like a traditional synthesizer. Yeah. So here, listen. It's no longer set to individual half-step frequencies in the typical scale. I always love it when you can do that. First of all, because it's fun to just have that whole spread of frequency to mess with. But it's also great because, as we're going to see later, VCO3 as an LFO and as an audio rate modulator, having the ability to change the frequency in this way allows you some very expressive and crazy modulation possibilities that'll be really fun. So yeah, you get to decide what frequency it's starting at by the last note that you played before you turn keyboard track off. And then you get to mess around and really create some interesting modulation. Or you can also just use it as a, in the midst of the frequencies that you're playing with the other oscillators. You can use it as a knob theremin if you want. I could do like Amazing Grace if you'd like. No, I probably couldn't. But anyway, so that's really cool. That's a cool thing that happens when you turn the keyboard track off. Okay, next we're going to talk about noise. And the noise section is awesome. I'm sorry, but it really is. Okay, we have 4 different types of noise. We're not just talking white noise, which is, the most typical noise to find on a synthesizer. But the white noise sounds like this. Very nice. We also have pink noise. Pink noise, as you may know, is weighted in such a way that you can hear more of the low frequencies instead of the high frequencies. In white noise, of course, all things are equal, but it doesn't sound like they're equal because the high frequencies sort of distract us from the low frequencies. Pink noise is weighted so that we can hear some more of the low frequencies, which makes it a better modulation source or a more interesting modulation source, or just a darker sort of noise sound. I want you to notice that the light for the pink noise is indeed pink. Next is red noise. Now, red noise is even more weighted towards the low end. Much more obvious low end frequencies. It's very dark. So you get to choose your flavor of noise, and it's great because, white noise is not always the noise that you want. These darker noises are more subtle and can really add to the depth of a sound in pleasing ways. And then finally, blue noise. Let's see. Blue noise seems weighted towards some of the higher frequencies. It seems to have less low end than white noise does. So that's cool. You kind of got a number of different options to make choices about, both timbrally as far as what kind of noise you want in your sound, or when we're using noise as a modulation, you can, these different noise arrangements have a very different effect on, for example, an oscillator. And we'll show that when we get into the audio mod section. So that is oscillator 3 and noise.